I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the Will Gather podcast. How can older adults and families ensure they have the resource and support they need while safeguarding everything they've worked for their entire lives? Today we talk about the critical topic of asset protection, addressing the challenges faced when planning for care in the later stages of our life. I'm honored to have John K. Ross as our guest. John is the founder of Ross and Shoalmire, one of the largest boutique estate planning and asset protection law firms in Texas, with a distinguished legal career spanning over 20 years. He is nationally recognized as an expert in estate planning, asset protection, and taxation. He's assisted countless families in protecting their assets and maximizing their resource. John's insight has been featured in prestigious publications like the Wall Street Journal and Forbes magazine, as he has spoken at national events on estate planning and asset protection issues. Join us as John shares his expertise. We gain valuable knowledge for securing a stable financial future. From the various types of senior living and home care costs to estate planning, we explore the often overlooked aspects of preparing for the unexpected. We talk about how a health crisis can lead to a housing crisis, which leads to a financial crisis, and what legal steps can be taken to mitigate the financial impact. We uncover 3 primary ways to finance that long-term care, what steps we can take to shift our assets and ensure they won't hinder our eligibility for government programs. John answers crucial questions about asset protection strategy, tax implications, and the best time to start planning. We explore those eligibility requirements, the importance of having proper documents in place to ensure that our wishes are followed and our assets are protected. Here is my interview with John K. Ross. Hi, John. Welcome. I'm really looking forward to this important conversation, and you are the person that gets to share with us all of that great info. And, it's so important as we plan for the future, ensure that we have resources to pay for care as older adults and families and get the support we need. So thank you for joining me. Welcome.
No, happy to be here. It's great.
Yeah. So we get to talk about a topic. I am obviously not an attorney, but I really wanted to have this conversation and I wanted to have you be the one to do that. So we're talking about asset protection. One big challenge families have and older adults is, how do we protect everything we've worked our whole life for and have saved and our assets if we're thinking about the future and the possibility of paying for long-term care, or just the various ways that we need to set ourselves up for success as we get a little bit older. So first, if we're kind of setting the stage with senior living, what are the various types and kind of their costs and payment structures, and why is it important that we even really need to be thinking about asset protection?
Well, and I will say that a lot of people, they don't even necessarily think about this, right? They
Yeah.
get to retirement age, 65, whatever it is, and their mental thought, at least when it comes to the estate planning side, is they immediately jump to what's going to happen when I die.
Right.
Right. And they
Right.
start thinking about a will or a trust or something, but they're thinking about passing assets down, and they forget about this whole middle part.
That's so true. Yeah.
What I tell people is you'll often see a progression where, let's just say that it's something sudden like a stroke, right? And you're going to go to the ER, you'll go to the ICU, you'll go to an admission room. Maybe you go to some inpatient rehabilitation at the hospital. If you're still not better, maybe you do some skilled nursing rehabilitation. And, all of that generally is going to be covered under your Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're still not better, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe, if you talk to most people, they'd say, well, I would want to go home. I would rather age in place. I'd rather stay at my home. Okay, well, great. If you can't get yourself off the couch into the bathroom and back, well, how are you going to do that? And that means you're going to have to bring people into the home. And even if you've got a pretty supportive family, they can't always be there 24 hours a day. And so now you're talking about paying people to do that. I think the going rate's about $20 to $25 an hour for home care like that.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. A couple hours a week, maybe not a big deal, but you need somebody there at $20 an hour, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're in the $10,000 to $20,000 a month range.
Mm-hmm.
The next level up would be something like assisted living. And of course, all of this is going to be very regional, right? But I'm in a pretty rural part of Texas. And so even in a rural southern area where the cost of living is very, very cheap, assisted livings are running $3,500 to $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
Compare that to, say, Boston or San Francisco or New York, right?
Looking at like 10,000 a month,
absolutely
minimum, yeah.
And then and with the assisted living, you can kind of think of assisted living as you need some assistance, but if there was a fire in the facility, you could get out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And if you need a higher level of care above that, now you're talking about the nursing home type care. Again, rural East Texas, which I think we're pretty close to the cheapest around the state or around the country, you're still looking at $175 to $200 a day. I think I was talking to an attorney up in Boston. He was saying that their average daily cost was about $400 a day.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is you have this health crisis, which has become a housing crisis. Where are you going to live? Your housing crisis has become a financial crisis because how are you going to pay for it? And then that's where somebody like me comes in and says, okay, what legally can we do to solve the financial crisis? Because that will solve the housing crisis, which will solve the health crisis. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot, and like anything else, you're going to have the two categories of people, the people that have planned well in advance and the people that didn't.
It's real evident. Yeah. I love how you put that all together. It really gives us that picture of how it all fits together and impacts us.
Yeah, and it could be something that progresses slowly. It could be an Alzheimer's or a Parkinson's or something like that. You're going to see the same issue, maybe not all at once, but you'll see that gradual progression of, well, okay, here's some things that we used to could do, but now we can't. Mm-hmm. And we're going to need other assistance for it. And so, yeah, all of this stuff is very expensive. And when it comes down to it, there's only three ways to pay for it. You can be one of the very small percentage of the population that has long-term care insurance. Mm-hmm. I think that's somewhere around the 5 to 6% of people.
Oh, is that it? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So a tiny little group. And what's funny is what I have seen when it comes to long-term care insurance is that the few clients that I have had that have long-term care insurance, often they don't need it. And the reason they don't need it is because they've got so much money, they can afford long-term care insurance. Yeah. And so it's almost, it's one of those things where it's like, well, for everybody else that really would need the insurance, they can't afford it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Right. If you can afford to pay that, monthly payment, then you're set up a little bit. Yeah.
Which of course brings up the second option, which is you just pay cash. Mm-hmm. There's this idea, and I literally have somebody in my office probably every day that will say something like, well, I heard that if I go to the nursing home, they're going to take all of my stuff, or they're going to take my house, or they're going to take all my money. They're not in the business of taking your stuff, right? There's not a nursing home in the country that's in the real estate business.
Right.
It's rent. And that's what people don't really get. Mm-hmm. If you went and stayed at a nice hotel tonight, it would cost you $200 and you'd get a free breakfast. If I went to the nursing home tonight, it would cost me $200, but I'd get dinner tonight. I'd get breakfast in the morning. Some nurse would probably give me a bath. Then I'd get lunch, and then they'd ask for another $200. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, if you look at it that way, it's a better deal than the Holiday Inn.
Yeah, you've got a lot of support there. Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is actually why you've seen some retirees move onto cruise ships.
I heard that the other day. Yeah.
You compare the cost, and what do you have on a cruise ship? You've got meal preparation, you've got medical staff on
Hmm.
board, and you got
Activities, you got
you
things
got
to
activities.
do.
That's right,
Yeah.
and a per day charge.
Hmm.
And so it almost starts looking like very similar, especially if you're somebody from New York or Northern California or something like that. So
Hmm.
anyway, so the second option is to pay cash. One thing on paying cash is if you are going to pay cash, it would be great if you could get more cash. That's where, at least potentially, VA benefits could come in. If a person was on active duty in the military for at least 90 days, and one of those 90 days was during a designated period of war. So World War II or Korea or Vietnam. You take me, I was in the Marines for 4 years.
Mm,
In 1990, they declared war in the Persian Gulf, and they haven't undeclared it since. So
yeah.
that makes everybody since
Yeah.
1990 a wartime veteran, even
Yeah.
if you're somebody like me that didn't go to Iraq or Afghanistan,
Right. Right.
still on active duty.
Yeah.
And so if I walked out today and I tripped in the parking lot and smacked my head against the concrete,
Hmm.
and now I need somebody else's help with my bathing or dressing and those activities of daily living,
Hmm.
there's a VA benefit that could potentially provide some extra funds. For a veteran with a spouse, you're looking at maybe $2,200, $2,300 a month. A single veteran, call it $1,800 a month.
Hmm.
And it's available to the surviving spouse of wartime veterans, as long as they were married to them for 1 year, married to them at the time of their death, and then not remarried. So my wife's grandmother, she passed away this last weekend.
Mm, sorry.
She, about 7 years ago, she was 92, so she made a dang good run at it, and was competent and fresh and lively all the way up until the last few weeks. So awesome run at it,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Full
But
life.
she lived in a assisted living. She really didn't need much assistance, but she lived in assisted living for about the last 7 years of her life, which was out of her price range. Her
Hmm.
$2,500 a month in Social Security is not going to pay the $3,500 a month bill. But because she was the widow of a World War II veteran, I was able to get her some VA money. That was for a surviving spouse, about $1,300, $1,400 a month. Well, you add that to her 2,500, and now she's pushing $4,000 a month. She can afford the assisted living, still have a little money left over for her car and car insurance and stuff like that.
Wow.
Heck of a deal.
Yeah. Is that something that your law firm assists people with, or was that because she was family? I'm just curious.
Well, both.
Yeah.
So we have helped a lot of veterans with that
Hmm.
particular benefit over the
Hmm.
years, which is part of the reason why I even knew about it.
Right.
I,
Yeah.
I've given presentations and talks all over the country, and often when I talk about that benefit, it's the first time anybody's ever heard of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's a organization that is called Patriot Angels. Have you heard of them by chance?
They do a wonderful
An
job of
amazing job.
processing those
Yeah. Yeah.
applications.
I just did an
Um,
interview with Suzette. It's coming out next Monday, but she's amazing. I had the opportunity to meet her in person, and they're incredible. And like the amount of veterans that don't know about the benefit or take advantage of it,
it's
yeah, it's
huge.
alarming.
But
Yeah.
like so many government programs, they tightened up the rules several years back. And so it is considered a need-based program. And so
Mm,
there are asset limitations. And this is where some prior planning can come
mhm.
into place, because if you are that veteran or that surviving spouse of that veteran, or you're married to that veteran now, and you know that this benefit could be of use to you in the future,
Right.
then maybe you need to take some steps now to protect some of those resources,
Hmm.
so that you're not having to just sit there and watch your savings bleed out to nothing before you get to a point where you could actually apply for something like this.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's helpful. Yeah. To
Right.
set it
In
up.
particular,
Yeah.
yeah. And then on top of that, even a professional that does VA benefits all the time, the worst part about applying to the VA is the VA.
Mm.
They're horrendously slow
Yeah.
at processing applications.
Oh, yeah, it takes like how many months or even like oh
Oh,
my
I've had some take a year and a half that they just got lost in the system somewhere. And so what do you do in between there?
God.
Right? I
Hmm.
mean, if you're already paying that assisted living, now the VA benefit might reimburse you back to when you applied, but what do you do in the meantime? especially if you haven't preserved assets that you can use to cover that kind of gap.
Right.
Period. And so option one is you have long-term care insurance. Option two is you just private pay, which there, see if you can get some more money. And then option three, which is the big one, is Medicaid. Medicaid is the only government program that directly pays for things like in-home care, assisted living, or nursing home care. And it is a very restrictive, need-based benefit. It's probably the most common way that people will pay for long-term care, either initially because they don't have anything, or in short order because they spend everything and now they're broke.
Right.
And so people really should understand what it takes to qualify for something like Medicaid. That way they can, again, you don't want to have to go down to zero. People tell me all the time, they say, well, they'll have one of three concerns. They would prefer not to go to a nursing home if at all possible. They would prefer not to be a burden on their friends and family. And they would prefer not going broke trying to accomplish the first two goals. Well, exactly. How are you going to do that? And if you're just sitting back saying, oh, I'll be fine. And then one day you have this whole problem and now you're watching your savings bleed out to nothing. Those are your options. What a lot of people don't realize is what do they need to do or what can they do both in advance and in a crisis situation that would help them preserve assets and qualify for these things.
Yeah.
And part of that is because the rules are just too complicated.
Yeah. And I think too, from the person that's not familiar or we don't have that legal background, we look at that information and it's overwhelming. We're like, where do we start? Who do we talk to? How do we figure this out? So I'm thankful for people like you that can help us do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And particularly with Medicaid, I mean, this really is something that you need the advice of somebody that knows how to do this and navigate that program. And, Medicaid is a federal program that is administered by the states. And so what happens is you have the federal legislators in Washington make rules. They give those rules to the Center for Medicare Services, CMS. They interpret the federal rules for the state manual. They give that to the state legislators. The state legislators interpret the federal manual by making state laws. They give those state laws to the state's Department of Health and Human Services, which interprets the state legislature's interpretation of CMS's interpretation of the federal law.
Yeah.
That's a lot of interpretations before you get down to your state.
Right. And then an individual level, I mean, there's so much paperwork and regulation that I remember we would have to have in place so that we could then optimize the reimbursement from, it's like this whole puzzle piece.
Well, yeah, Texas Medicaid, for example, requires us to fax the Medicaid application like it's 1984.
No. Wow.
And one thing that we have learned just by experience is that their fax system will only take a fax that is less than 100 pages. Well, how do I know that? Because so many of the Medicaid applications are in excess of 100 pages and we have to send them in 2 faxes. So that should give you some idea of the volume of paperwork that goes into this.
Yeah.
You look at the application. Okay, the application's 6 pages long or 8 pages long, but then 3 months worth of bank statements, copy of the deed to your house, appraisal on your car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, life insurance, your Medicare, your blah, 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 blah.
So much.
And it's a mess. But I think if people understood some of the rules related to Medicaid, they would probably be a little bit less afraid of it. So for example, in any state in the United States, you can have a home, including all the land the home sits on, and still qualify for Medicaid. The minimum equity limit anywhere in the United States is $635,000.
That's not too bad.
That's for rural East Texas or Southwest Arkansas, that's a big old house.
Yeah.
Or it's a small house on a lot of land, right? It's not a per acreage sort of deal. It's the house and all the contiguous land connected to it. Total value under 635. But that's the minimum. Many states have upped that minimum. So I believe in New York, for example, it's maybe 1.2 million. Well, of course, if you're in New York City, that's a closet.
It is. It's like a 1-bedroom apartment.
But But still, you can see where different places going to have a different value, but anywhere you're going to be able to have a house, you're going to be able to have a car. Weirdly enough, while there's a limit to the value of the house, there is no limit to the value of the vehicle.
I did not know that.
Isn't that kind of strange?
Yeah.
So I could have a $60,000 home and then somehow afford a 2023 Bugatti Veyron, which is, I think they're like $4 or $5 million car, right? But I would still qualify for Medicaid with my house and my car.
Yeah, there you go. Is that one of the tips? Like if you need to put some asset, but that's a depreciating asset, right?
Well, I could tell you a story. So I had a guy, he was down in Houston, and his mom had a house. She had a 1992 Mercury Grand Marquis that was worth about $500 and about $80,000, $90,000 in the bank, which we needed to get rid of before we could get her qualified for Medicaid. Well, he sold the old Mercury, combined that all money together. That weekend happened to be the Barrett-Jackson auto auction. If you've ever seen that on TV, those really like super nice restored classic cars that they auction off. Well, he goes to the Barrett-Jackson auction with his mom's money. He buys her a fully restored 1969 Camaro SS,
Wow.
drops about $80,000, $90,000 on it. But his point was that is a non-depreciating automobile.
Right. That is a collection asset.
Right.
Yeah.
He can turn around and sell that after mom dies, and bam, the money's back. And so, you actually, that could be a strategy. I've had clients where, again, they have a home, but that home is sold to purchase a larger home. Or in one case, the kids, they sold dad's house, they combined that with his investment account, they liquidated the investment account and bought a really nice lake home on the water. And that was going to become kind of the family gathering place, and so now they're, not only did they save dad's assets, but they created this memory that the family can enjoy for years and years to come, right? All the family can come and they can go boating and they can fish and they can do all of these things, and all because of that. Had they not known that that was an option, then they would have just spent all of dad's money and
not have had anything.
Yeah. And then you get, there's all kinds of other little ones out there. Ongoing farming and ranching operations are excluded. So that's a big one for Texas, as you can imagine. Even in Arkansas, we have some of the largest chicken farms in Arkansas. This is home to Tyson, Pilgrim's Pride, all right around where I'm at.
Yeah.
So, I had some clients in and their dad was going to the nursing home and they say, oh, well, we've got chickens. And I was like, oh, well, really? I said, how many chickens do y'all have? I'm just kind of curious. And they said, well, we don't have an accurate count because, chickens die every day. They said we're probably somewhere around 150, 200,000.
It's a lot of chicken.
That's a mess of chickens.
Wow.
And those chickens are housed in these gigantic chicken houses that are sitting on 40, 50, 60 acres of land. All of it's excluded. It doesn't count for Medicaid purpose. I mean, that's a $1 million worth of farming operation that does not count. Small businesses. I've had mechanics, roofers, all different kinds of trades, but a ongoing trade or business is a non-countable asset. And then, in some states like Texas, for example, retirement accounts, IRAs don't count. And so
that's incredible.
What's crazy is I could take two people and I could have, here's one guy and he's got a $500,000 house. He drives a Ferrari and has $2.5 million in his IRA. Okay. And then I have this other guy over here and he lives in a $60,000 house. He drives a $500 car. He owns a rent house down the street that's worth about 50 grand, has a couple of crackheads that live in there that pay $300 a month every once in a while. The guy driving the Ferrari qualifies for Medicaid because those three assets don't count. This poor guy over here who's barely getting by does not qualify for Medicaid because the rent house is a countable asset.
Wow.
And what's crazy is if you would have grabbed these two guys off the street and said, what are you going to do if you ever have to go to the nursing home?
Right.
The wealthy one would have said, I'll private pay for it because I've got too much money to ever qualify for Medicaid. And the poor one would have said, I don't have anything to worry about because I barely have any assets at all.
Yeah.
And again, I don't make the rules, but
Mm-hmm.
this is the problem, is people don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so that guy over here that's got the very limited net worth, he's the one that has the problem. He's the one that needs to be pre-planning and say, okay, here's this rent house. It's valuable, but it counts against you for Medicaid purposes. Let's try to shield that asset. Let's do something with it so that when it comes time for Medicaid, it won't count against you, but maybe you can still benefit from it while you're alive and healthy.
Right.
And then when you get to the time, it won't count.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and that would be huge.
What do you think the misconceptions are in terms of, is it that people just don't have the education or awareness to know? Because I think we think, okay, Medicaid someday I have to write spend down, you spend all my money and all my assets and then I'll qualify, without understanding that they can put all of these other things in place.
Yeah, most people have just never heard of any of this. And even if they've experienced it in their own family, they may have just, their mom had Alzheimer's, their mom went to the nursing home, mom spent all of her money. When she ran out of money, they qualified for Medicaid.
Yeah.
And so they're just under the assumption that that's what you do. That there was no other alternative. So there's that. Getting the advice from the wrong place. We talked about VA and earlier, and I've had people, and they'll say, oh, well, I called the VA and they told me I'm not qualified for anything. Or I called Medicaid and they said I make too much money. Or I called Medicaid and they said I had too much assets. And I will often explain it. I say, look, when have you ever in your life, it's April 15th, right? It's tax time. Taxes are due. Now, in all of your working years, did you ever call the IRS and say, hey, I'm curious, how much money do I owe y'all?
Yeah. No, we don't.
No, nobody. And when you put it that way,
Yeah.
it sounds ridiculous.
Totally.
That you would call the government agency that is operating the program and expect them to give you the best advice on how to navigate through their system. The IRS, if you call the IRS, you say, hey, I earned $1. Do I owe tax? Yes. Pay us money.
Yeah.
If you call a CPA and say, hey, I earned $1, do I owe tax? The CPA is going to say, well, wait a second. Do you own a house? Do you have any dependents? Did you donate anything to charity? Have you paid property taxes? And they're going to go through all of these little rules. And at the end, sure enough, you don't owe any tax. Maybe you're even getting a refund. But the IRS wasn't going to tell you that.
Right.
And so you go and you get that pro to help you navigate through the tax system. Same thing with this.
Yeah. It's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no. So as far as that goes, on the shorthand, our clients, you can see most of them are either pre-planning or crisis planning. So if somebody's coming in and mom's already at the nursing home, right? She's had that stroke. She's made the round. She's now at the nursing home. Family said, you know what, it doesn't look like she can come home. Her Medicare days are going to run out here soon, and it's going to be private pay. It's $200 a day. What do we do?
Yeah.
And at that point, we're going to look at what does she have? And the first thing we typically would look at is, are there any permissible gifts? There's a general rule for Medicaid and for VA as well, but there's a general rule with Medicaid that you cannot just give away assets and qualify. If you give away any assets within 5 years prior to applying for Medicaid, there will be a period of time that they will not pay for you. But there are exceptions. For example, if you have a disabled family member, so maybe one of your kids got hurt at work years ago and he's receiving Social Security disability benefits. Well, you can transfer assets to a disabled child, or maybe even a trust for a grandchild that's disabled. So there are some exceptions to that. And again, these can vary from state to state. So for example, in Texas, you can transfer assets to college savings accounts for your grandchildren or great-grandchildren. But in Arkansas, that would not work. So you can look at different states and there. So first is, are there anybody that we could give it to permissibly within the rules? Second, is there anything we can spend it on? A prepaid irrevocable burial contract does not count for Medicaid purposes. So if you prepay for your funeral, as long as you can't get the money back, it doesn't count. So that's the first question I'll always ask them.
Yeah.
Well, has mom paid for her funeral?
Right.
Well, no. Well, okay. take 10,000 bucks, go over to the funeral home and prepay for everything. That's $10,000 we don't have to spend at the nursing home now.
Right.
And then we're going to have the question about the car or the house and, some of that sort of stuff. But even beyond that, there are often all kinds of things. For example, if there's a spouse at home, there are ways that you can shift assets between the spouses from the sick spouse to the healthy spouse in order to get the sick spouse qualified. And even that gifting penalty that I mentioned earlier, I say if you give money away, they're going to disqualify you. So generally, we'll just say that if you were to give away $6,000, that's 1 month that Medicaid won't pay for you. Okay. Well, let's say I've got $60,000. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 30,000 bucks. Okay. Well, when I give you $30,000, Medicaid is now not going to pay for the first 5 months, right? 6,000 divided by 30,000, right? Yep. So yeah, we could do the math, right? Medicaid says, okay, you gave away 30,000 bucks. We're not going to pay for the next 5 months. Well, I take the other 30,000 and I give it to the nursing home because the nursing home costs $6,000 a month. So I've prepaid for the nursing home for the same 5 months that Medicaid's not going to pay for me.
Yeah.
But what did I do? I saved half of my money. Right then on day one. And so that took no pre-planning. That was just pure. Mom's already in the nursing home. How do we save this last 60,000 bucks? Well, we're not going to save all of it, but we're going to save some of it. Maybe all of it if we go buy her a $60,000 car, but at least half of it just by using some of these rules that are available.
Yeah. I see that. I saw that so much. My first part of my career, I worked on a transitional care unit. So, rehab after hospital stay, whatnot. And there would be a good handful of people that in that crisis realized they couldn't go home again. And all of a sudden they had to figure out, what do I do? How do I pay for this? Medicare's only got 90 days, I think, max at the TCU. So it was really interesting in the panic. I mean, people are like, all of a sudden having to decide where they come up with that money. And it's shocking. And I think this is a good understanding of some of those things we can put in place to give a little bit of hope. Like, okay, you can manage some of that.
Right. And then the other side of the coin is, okay, so I'm looking at my parents, for example. They retired. They were both college professors. They retired at around, mid to late 60s, like so many other folks. They're mostly debt free, but, they've got a big house. My mother has a half interest in a farm up in Oklahoma. They've got some savings that they've accumulated. They're perfectly healthy. They're active. They're doing all the things. But of course, their son is somebody who deals with this all day long, every day. Yeah. And so I'm saying, look, this may be how you are today, but it's not how you're going to be in 15 years or 20 years. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a trust for y'all. We're going to design this trust specifically so that any assets that are in the trust will not count towards your eligibility for Medicaid later on down the road. And we're going to put maybe your house in there. We're going to put the farm in there. We're going to put some of the savings in there. And this is going to be our nest egg. And y'all are still going to manage it. Y'all could still potentially benefit from it. But now we've got it shielded.
Right.
And, now the transfer to that trust is still subject to that same 5-year look back rule. But when we do this at say 65, I think my mother's about to turn 80, right? So that was 15 years ago. Yeah. We're clear.
So you're in the clear.
We've been clear for a long time. And so, here's this huge pot of resources over here that are now protected. Maybe we still have to spend some. I'm not trying to get them down to broke or anything. I just want them to live their lives, but they probably weren't going to spend this anyway. And even if they did, they still could if they wanted to go on a world cruise or something, right?
Have access to it. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, that gives you an idea. And neither of my parents are veterans, but had they been veterans, maybe that same trust could have been used so that those assets wouldn't count for VA purposes either, right? So now we've not only have we opened up the VA, we've opened up Medicaid as a possible payer. And, I've had some folks, they say, well, John, why would I do that? I don't even really want to be on Medicaid. you know. And of course, one idea that a lot of people have is that they think the care that they would get under the Medicaid program is somehow different than the care they would get if they were private paying.
Mm. And what have you found? No?
Some of this is based on location, but
Mm-hmm.
every facility in my town here accepts Medicaid or private pay. You could do
Mm-hmm.
either one.
Mm-hmm.
So you can walk down any hall in that nursing home. Some of those people are privately paying at $200 a day. Some of those people, the state is paying the $200 a day.
Yeah.
But it's the same nurses in the same facility getting
Mm-hmm.
the same care. Now, you will start to see particularly in bigger markets, Dallas, Little Rock, Boston, New York, place like that,
Mm-hmm.
you'll start to see where there will be some really, really high end places.
Mm-hmm.
It's an assisted living or it's a nursing home, but
It's
it's
like a
got,
resort.
yeah, it's got teak wood
Yeah.
floors and
Mm-hmm.
it has a movie theater inside the place.
Mm-hmm.
And, they've got an executive chef cooking, steak Oscar for dinner on a
Yeah.
Tuesday, right? Yeah, you're probably private paying for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
There's also in Minnesota, there were communities that have where maybe, let's say, three of the apartments were allotted for that Medicare or elderly waiver or whatnot, for however your state has it set up. And then the rest were not. So the availability was really limited, which kind of goes to your pre-planning piece of
mhm.
is like understanding too where you live, what's available to you, and what that looks like. If you've got your heart set on a particular location, is that even available, And if so,
Sure.
get your name on the list. Yeah.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be the thing, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at a place that, like you said, has a limited number of slots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because we have a place like that here in town where, yeah, they may have 100 beds, but only 3 or 4 available Medicaid beds.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you want to go there, you're gonna private pay
Mm-hmm.
for at least for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, if you need to preserve your resources so that you can private pay. But when the time comes and maybe you do hit the top of that list, you could switch over and at least whatever you have left is now preserved.
Yeah.
You'd hate
Yeah.
to get to the top of the list and then realize you still have too much money, so you can't qualify for Medicaid. And so they just shove somebody else in
Right.
that slot and put you back down on the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
Well, that would stink.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, and this kind of comes back to some personal choices, right? But I'm thinking for myself, among other things, I'm the president of the Tri-State Alzheimer's Alliance, have been for about 8 years.
Mm.
That's Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas.
Thank you.
So it's something that I know quite a bit about. And I've seen lots and lots of people go through this process. And if I have Alzheimer's, there will come a point where I won't care. I will have no opinion on
Yeah.
my living environment.
Yeah.
My family might, but
Right.
I will have no opinion on this whatsoever. And so to me, I would rather say, hey, you know what? Let's preserve my assets for people who can use them and benefit and enjoy them. I don't want to be a drain on others. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
even if I was in that nice private pay facility with the teak wood floors and the movie theater, at the point where I don't care, move me.
Yeah, and you can communicate that while you still can, right? Your
Absolutely,
wishes to your
right.
family.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can have that conversation and say, look, hey, this is important to me that I have a nice living environment, but
Mm-hmm.
I also recognize that there will come a time where I just won't care.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to
Mm-hmm.
keep me in this luxury setting
Mm-hmm.
when I won't know the difference between that and a tent in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
move me.
Yeah.
And that's me talking personally, right?
Right.
Everybody's going to have their own opinions on this. I've had some folks that say, absolutely no facility-based care. I want to be at home,
Mm-hmm.
period. Okay, well then how are we going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at those programs that are available. Even the Medicaid programs that pay for home care won't pay for 24-hour-a-day care.
Right.
So how are you going to supplement?
And I'm sure you see that when you're having conversations with families and having to plan for the future, that it naturally comes out where they say, here's what I'm planning for, right? Here's
Mhm.
what my wishes are, which is just another means to have everything in place so that you can communicate your wishes when you might not be able to at some point. Yeah.
That's true. And I will say you do also have to be somewhat realistic about it.
Hmm.
It's one thing to say, I prefer to stay at home. It's a whole nother thing to look at your kid in the eye and say, promise me you'll never put me in a nursing home. Because nobody can honestly make that
We
promise.
can't. I know I tell
It
people that all the time, like, don't make promises. We don't know. Yeah.
right. I mean, if you have an open tracheotomy, for example, the amount of technical equipment that goes into making sure that you're not breathing in bacteria and the kind of clean room you have to be in and the kind of nursing attention you're going to need on a day-to-day basis, you are not getting that at home. Period.
Hmm.
End of story.
Yeah.
You
So
know, and so
intense.
yes, you can say all day long, I prefer to stay at home, but there could be situations where that just doesn't work. But imagine the burden you've put on your child when they have no choice but to put you in that facility, and yet you made them promise not to do that very thing.
Mm,
That's
yeah.
that's not fair to them. And so say, hey, I prefer this, I want to work toward it, let's plan for it. If it doesn't work out, that's okay, but let's try.
Hmm.
That's okay, saying
Hmm.
that's okay.
Hmm.
And then if you try and fail, hey, that's okay, we try and fail at things all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hate when people, because I've had them sit there in my office and
Oh,
say
I'm
that, and I'm like,
sure.
oh, please don't do that to anybody.
I
um,
know. Yeah. It's a lot. And this has been, I think, just having all of these questions in place and families knowing that they can reach out to professionals like you. So, when it comes to it, is there a best practice process that you recommend for people? Okay, start here. Let's look at this. Contact an elder law attorney. Run us through what that looks like.
Well, it's funny that you say that because I will get the question all the time and they'll say, "Well, John, how old do I need to be before I see an elder law attorney?"
Mm,
And my answer every time is 18.
yeah, as an
Eh,
adult.
right, as an adult, right? But and I mean, I'm being a little funny about that,
Hmm.
but you don't get to pick when you become disabled.
Yeah.
And so, for example, some very basic estate planning documents like powers of attorney, so that somebody can handle business for you, somebody can make medical decisions for you. I make my children sign those on the day they turn 18.
It's a great idea. I've never heard that before, and I'm adopting that. That's a great idea.
Right? Well, and the problem is the first time you have a consultation with a family and their 19-year-old son was at the University of Arkansas, was in a car wreck, has a
Mm,
catastrophic brain injury, and they can't talk to Blue Cross Blue Shield about their own son,
wow.
even though he's covered under their health insurance, because he's 18, that would be a HIPAA violation unless we have his permission. And now you're telling this family that, okay, we're going to have to go to court and have you appointed as your own son's legal guardian because he's 1 year over 18
Wow.
and has become disabled. And you don't want to have that conversation with me. You want
Hmm.
to say, oh, man, I've got this tragedy, absolute tragedy in our family. But hey, I can at least talk to the phone company and I can
Hmm.
cancel his cell phone service and I can deal with his apartment and I can call the school and get copies of the records
Hmm.
and I can go to the hospital and get copies of the records. You've got some basic paperwork. So yeah, when I say everybody over the age of 18, I really do kind of
Yeah.
mean that,
Yeah.
right? But even then, so for example, this is again just another example, but if you look at my own personal planning that I've had in place for probably 20 years, my stuff says when I die, I leave everything to the wife, right? It's hers. She can bring her next husband to the funeral, right? Whatever. I don't care. I'm dead. It's hers, which this is what I would call the I love you plan, right? And
Hmm.
anybody that's listening right now, if they have a will or something like that, that's probably what it says, right? I leave everything to you and you leave everything to me, except that theirs has a period after that sentence. It says, I leave everything to my wife, period. Mine has a comma after it.
Mm.
It says, I leave everything to my wife, comma. But if my wife is incapacitated, then instead of going to her directly, I want it held in a trust for her benefit that won't count towards her eligibility for Medicaid.
Wow. Yeah.
So imagine we're in a car wreck. I'm dead. She walks away without a scratch. What's
Hmm.
mine is hers.
Hmm.
We're in a car wreck and I'm dead and she has a brain injury.
Mm.
What's mine is now held in a special needs trust for her benefit, and it'll never count towards her eligibility for Medicaid, and
Mm.
yet will be there to improve the quality of her life.
Yeah.
and so easy.
It
That was so
is. It was
easy to
one
add.
comma and an extra sentence. Yeah.
Right, one comma and an extra
Mhm.
sentence,
Mhm.
and now I have built in a plan for leaving behind an incapacitated spouse.
Mm.
And frankly, as far as that goes, then you say, okay, well, when we're both dead, I leave everything to my 4 ungrateful children. But once again, there's a comma,
Mhm.
because if any one of them has become disabled between now and the time of my death, I want their share held where it won't mess up their benefits. So that kind of contingent planning, if you're married, if you have children, you need to be planning for leaving behind a disabled spouse or leaving behind a disabled child, even if they're not disabled now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned Alzheimer's earlier. If you get Alzheimer's, your life expectancy is 10 to 15 years.
Mhm.
The life expectancy of the spouse of somebody with Alzheimer's is 3 years.
The toll it takes on our physical and mental health.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
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 huge.
absolutely
Mhm.
brutal to be a
Mhm.
spousal caregiver, and because
Mhm.
of that, it kills the caregiver. And so all the focus is on mom because she has Alzheimer's. Dad's healthy. He's taking care of mom. We need to focus on mom. No, because dad's probably going to kill himself trying to care for mom.
Right.
Now he has died, he's left behind an incapacitated spouse. And while he was able to do the caregiving, she was able to be at home and they
Mm.
didn't need Medicaid. But now that he's
Now they
died
do.
unexpectedly, we got a problem. If
Mhm.
they all, even something as simple as like what I have in my planning, where at his death, he has shielded assets for his now disabled wife, we're that much closer to getting her qualified for Medicaid benefits or whatever
Mhm.
else because we've shielded a big chunk of it. And
Mm.
really there's no time frame. If you're single, you got no kids, no spouse, and you're broke, you could probably get away with just having some powers of attorney in place.
Mhm.
But if you
Mhm.
said yes to any of those other things,
Yeah.
you could probably use a little bit more planning in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. This has been so fun because as I'm looking at all of my questions, I'm checking them off one by one because you've answered them, which I love. And your examples have been so good. I think we relate to the example. We can see ourselves in the story. Is there a time or like how often do we review our asset protection strategies? Is it something that we set up and we can kind of forget about it, or is it like ongoing? We got to look at it all the time?
The simplest, I make a lot of analogies to the medical field.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go to the doctor, you do the whole physical, right? They take blood work, they maybe even make you run on the treadmill and do the little heart tests, and they run all of those things, and everything comes back and it's just golden. You're
Mm,
perfect condition. That doesn't mean you're in the same condition next year.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
might be, you might not be, right? So yeah, on the one hand, the first step obviously is getting it done, getting something in place so that somebody's analyzed your situation and said, okay, once you have these things in place, you're good. Beyond that, it's going to be an age and stage. If you're in your 40s, hey, you got it's unlikely that a decade's going to change all that much
Mm-hmm.
unless you have something specific that happens, right? Maybe there's a death in the family or something, some other sort of tragedy. Well, yeah, those are going to need to be addressed. But if everything's just rocking along, you might could get from 45 to 55, no big deal. Maybe you even get from 55 to 65. Again, maybe no big deal. You hit 65, maybe you need to review that at 70, maybe again at 75. At
Mm-hmm.
75, maybe you need to look at it again at 76 and 77 and 78.
Yeah, more
And
frequency. Mm-hmm.
yeah, as you get closer to the reality of these issues, the long-term care and your risk starts really getting higher, your risk of death starts getting higher, then the more frequent you review this, the less likely something is going to jump up and bite you.
Mm,
And again, beyond that, anytime there's a major change in the family dynamics,
mm-hmm.
if you get a bad diagnosis, that's when you have that conversation again. Oh, my husband has Alzheimer's. We need to go see John and talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe nothing to be done, but it's a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, even people forget that, like, yeah, okay, I'm a lawyer. This is what I do, but I'm so deep because this is all that we do. I'm
Mm,
so deep into the medical community and the financial community
yeah.
that, when somebody comes and they say, oh, my husband has Alzheimer's, John, do we need to relook at our trust or do we need to change our powers of attorney? Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't. But also, Have you been to the Alzheimer's Alliance? Have you looked at this day respite center over here? Here's the phone number. Here's the cell phone number for a social worker I know who could maybe arrange for some home care providers. Here's a geriatric care manager. Give this person a call because they can help coordinate a number of different things.
I love that. Thank you for doing that. It's that like holistic approach. And I think families feel really supported when they're working with a professional, and then they can provide all those other resources. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it should be, right? It should be a team effort. This is also, it's also a good time. The attorney, the CPA, insurance agent, your banker. I mean, all of these people should really be on the same page.
Yeah.
Your financial advisor. You don't want one doing one thing and somebody else not knowing about it and doing something totally different.
So that's a really good piece of advice is for families, find the attorney that has the mindset to collaborate and work with all of those other disciplines, and that it's that cohesive support system.
It is. And it may take a bit. That you may have to search around a little bit. There is, for example, with elder law attorneys, there's the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, NAELA. And they have a website. You can go on their website and you can search for members of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys by zip code, find one in your area. But if you go and meet them and they seem aloof, they're not paying attention to you, you're not having the kind of conversation that you were hoping to have, well, then find somebody else, right? Maybe that's just not the right person for you. So there is some shopping around. And of course, you can always go and ask friends and family, but that doesn't mean, I really liked the guy that did my divorce in 1982. Right?
Yeah. A little bit different, but yeah.
That's a different practice of law. That's not the guy. Now you might call him and see if he has a recommendation of somebody. But that's almost like saying, I'm having heart palpitations. I'm going to call my dentist.
Right.
Okay, yeah, they're both doctors, but wrong kind. And so, you want to find the people that do this sort of thing for a living, and particularly ones that maybe have been at it for a little while. Because it does take some time to really understand the nuance of all of this.
It does. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been really fun to hear your perspective and your dynamic. And I think people are really going to enjoy, if we can enjoy listening to something like this, because it's just going to be helpful and we want the tools to do that. So where can we reach out or learn more about you and your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, I've got my law firm, and I actually have helped people all over the United States at this point. I've done a number of things. And so the name of the law firm is Ross and Shoalmire, and you can find us on Google and all of that sort of stuff. It's rossandscholmire.com. I also host a podcast called Big Picture Retirement, and it's me and a guy who is an absolute expert in Social Security benefits. His name is Devin Carroll, and he hosts the Social Security benefit channel on YouTube, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And he talks about retirement from the financial side of it. I talk about it from the legal side of it, and we cover all of these sort of topics in a lot of detail.
Yeah,
so, great. If you like podcasts, once you get done listening to these and you're all caught up, then you're looking for something else, you can go check out Big Picture Retirement.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you for saying that. And I know it's like, how much can we cover in an hour? And then if they want to dive deep, they need to check out your work. That's great.
There you
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. I appreciate it. And now I know I've got someone I can call when I have all my questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you want to have me back sometime, just shout.
Yeah. I'd love it. Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.